Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast. Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching. I'm Katie.
And I'm Elena.
And Elena, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
Great to see you. Yeah, how are you doing? I'm great. I would say I'm decent, actually. I'm eating a lot more. I started on my whole roll of things are great. And then I was like, you know what? I'm actually still recovering and that's hard.
Yeah, well, let's unpack that a little bit. How have things been feeling? We talked a couple episodes ago about how you're sort of on a health journey, trying to figure things out while also going all in on coaching and training in a really exciting way. So what are your updates from the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I would say updates are, I'm kind of in the transition right now. I haven't gone fully part-time yet for work, so wrapping up a lot and then busy on that front, but I've just been eating a ton and it seems like my body's metabolism or something triggered where I'm hungry all the time. So that's been really interesting for me. I'm realizing how hard it is to actually get in a ton of food every day, but then also still having some issues with sleep and some other stuff around maybe how my body's adjusting to all of this energy. So still pursuing a lot of answers, getting some tests and talking to nutritionists and trying to get the professional help that I think will help me get to where I want to be. So making progress, but not there quite yet, I think is a good summary.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it will be a journey. And I think you're doing all the right steps and people should learn from this that it often is a journey. Figuring out all this stuff, health stuff is never really linear in the way that you expect it to be, whether it's injury, whether it's reds, whether it's, anything under the sun. I think we always find there are these challenges and ups and downs along the way, and just want to cheer you on as you're doing that, because I think you're doing everything right.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But yeah, I think the reminder there is that I'm getting frustrated sometimes with myself where I think, I've had a few really good days. I should be able to get going again, but it doesn't even work like that. There's a lot more patience that's at play. So the one cool thing though is that we're at least recording right now during UTMB week, which is my big goal race for next year. So I'm kind of using this as my start zero point of okay, I have a year and I'm going to be on that journey. And I'm also so excited to follow all the action this week over in Chamonix. I have quite a few friends racing. So, I guess this will probably air after UTMB, but hopefully some people are tuning into that this weekend with all the live streaming and all that, because it'll be a really cool event to follow.
That's so exciting. I had so much fun following that last year. And actually, we have a lot of triathletes who are listening. So if people don't know what UTMB is, can you just tell us a little bit about this race?
Yeah, absolutely. It is the Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc. So it's basically the World Championships, the Tour de France style of the ultra trail running world. And it's a week long of activities basically in Chamonix, France, but it culminates with the running of the actual UTMB race, which is a 106-mile loop. It's, if anyone has heard of the trekking route, the Tour de Mont Blanc, it's basically just running that trekking loop in one day. So it's 106 miles, 33,000 feet of gain. It travels through France, Switzerland, and Italy as it circumnavigates Mont Blanc. And it's just where, the who's who of ultra running will be there. There's so much energy and people travel to cheer on people on, all parts of this very mountainous course. So very fun to follow along and a lot of energy from the trail running world this week.
Oh, that's so cool. And I am so excited that you actually get to do this next year. I'm in the back of my mind, maybe I can go. Maybe I can come spectate this experience.
Yeah, next year, a year from now, we'll be doing podcast live from UTMB.
Oh, that would be so cool. But yeah, this is absolutely a race to follow. If you love big sport stories and just amazing feats of humankind, it is the coolest race ever. So definitely follow that. And yeah, so excited that's going to be part of your journey too.
Yeah, it'll be very cool. Well, how are you doing, Katie? Anything going on with your recoveries?
Yeah, I am doing pretty well, I would say. I think we were talking about this a little bit offline, but I was sort of on my own health journey leading up to my big race and then trying to figure out what was going on. And I'm feeling a lot better right now, but I don't know if it's just from not training for an A race like I was before. I've started doing some supplementing and have talked about things like low ferritin and found out I had maybe some low B12 and other indicators that are often a little off in athletes. But anyway, for me, I think I'm not really going to question it too much that I am feeling better. And I'm just going to try to lean into the fact that things feel pretty stable and pretty good right now, but also try to not use that as permission to just go big and do crazy things all the time. I think I often, as soon as I feel a little bit good, I'm I want to do something huge. But I'm also trying to respect that off season because, as we know, it can be up and down. And I had a run earlier today that felt absolutely like trash. So that happens too. But yeah, just going to try to keep making the right choices and prioritizing kind of wellness over fitness for now, just like we've been talking about, and hoping that will set me up for a strong 2025, which is honestly, I think both of our goals is just getting to 2025 and hitting it so hard and having it be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a good transition then into coaching and training insights for the week on how we're thinking about it or what we're learning from athletes right now. So Katie, do you want to take it off with your coaching and training insights?
Yes, that was such a smooth transition. I love it. But I would love to kick us off. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was reflections on building durability in the White Mountains. So that was my catchy title of this little thing here. But basically, for some context, over the weekend, I went up and did a really big hike in the Whites with my husband. And it was the 10-year anniversary of the day that we met, which was on a big hike in the White Mountains as part of our Dartmouth freshman orientation trip. And we also got engaged 5 years ago in the mountains. So it's a really, really special spot for us, kind of up in the northern presidentials. And so I think the hike we did was about 12 or 13 miles, but then I was the human car shuttle. And so I had to run an additional 3 miles on a rail trail to get our car. And I think I haven't been up in the mountains too much other than for my goal race this year. But I think I was reminded that the White Mountains really can beat you up. So in this one big hike, I hit my head on a branch. I had wet feet. There were massive temperature fluctuations. I rolled my ankle. I hit my shin. I slipped on some slippery rocks. And it's just not very forgiving at all. And the White Mountains in general, I think I'm very grateful to have had those experiences so much in my athletic career, because I think it's built a lot of durability that has been useful in all of my kind of other endurance endeavors and will kind of continue to be useful. So as someone who now lives in Boston, in the city, I was reminded I got to keep going up there and stay durable, because it's not the same as running loops around the Charles. And kind of wanted to kick that to our audience too. If you are in the New England area, we have a lot of listeners who live kind of outside of Boston or just in this general area. I think a great project for the off season is to plan some hikes in the fall and get out there and know that you're going to have to practice good fueling. You're going to have to practice being on your feet all day and having exposure to the elements. And that is something that will help you, even if you just race sprint and Olympic distance races.
I love that. Yeah. And also just can say from my own experience more holistically, growing up a hockey player, and I was very contact oriented. And I realized that as I got away from contact sports, whenever I was hit in a way that I wasn't expected, my body was much less prepared to handle it. It bothered me more and I got more sore. And I reflected on that being maybe there's something the body learns about how to handle unexpected stress. And that reminds me of what you're saying with this, where there's something intangible about just having that exposure for durability building. And I think the White Mountains is one of the best places to get that. So very good tip.
Totally. All right. My second insight, I just have two today. So we are in the off season, as we've been talking about. And I've been telling all my athletes, go forth, do unstructured time, do yoga, play pickleball, have your best life. That's not kind of swim, bike, run structure all the time. And then I've had a couple of my athletes ask me if I can actually program unstructured workouts for them. Hey, do yoga this day and go for a hike that day. And so this sort of led me to think a little bit more on just the importance of a mental break in addition to a physical break. And I think it can be scary if you're used to having a plan and knowing what you need to do every single day to then just go into a blank training peaks, for example. But I do think that there's something really important about waking up and saying, how do I actually feel today? Because when we have a training plan, it can be a lot harder to deviate from it. It might feel like we're doing something wrong. It might feel like we're not following what we should be doing. But honestly, the thing that's the most important in my book about the off season is being able to actually listen to that. And you might find that if you listen, you might need a little bit more rest than you think, or you might not be super motivated, and that is okay. That may just mean that your body is asking for that rest. So my answer to these athletes is no, I'm not going to program yoga when you should do it for you. I think it's important. It doesn't mean that I'm firing you as an athlete. It just means that we're taking a little break for both of us, but especially for you. And I will say this is something I struggle with too, but have really been able to lean into it recently. And once you get there, it really does feel super good.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Yeah, it can be hard to let go of the control sometimes, but also very needed. Small breaks.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Elena, on to you. Coaching and training insights.
Yeah, I guess mine is not going to be very surprising because it's really what's all been on my mind recently if anyone's been paying attention. But fuel. And I guess the one thing I want to put out there that I have found helpful that I don't think we actually explicitly discussed last time is the equation for energy availability, at least what's been used in research for what you can baseline yourself for to understand if you're in a period of low energy availability. And that is that your energy availability is equal to your energy intakes, the calories that you're taking in, minus your energy expenditure. So think the active calories you're seeing on your watch. All of that over your fat-free mass in kilograms, which is if you take your body weight multiplied by your percent body fat or subtracted out your percent body fat in kilograms. So you have to do all this calculation stuff. That generally gets you a number, and you want that number to be over, for women, 45, for men, 40. And if you type in on Google too, I mean, we'll put it in the show notes, but just look up your energy availability calculator. And I think it's a generally good tool for having an understanding of how much fuel you actually need for the work that you're doing. So if you're at all concerned about this, or if you're even not that concerned, but thinking like, oh, I'm just curious, I think it's really helpful because it was a lot higher for me than I even realized. And I think that everyone should pay attention to that number. So that's a good tip that I've been kind of sharing with people to make sure that everyone's checking in a little bit on that. And then my other main thing that I've been thinking about is that I have some athletes that are starting to build mileage as they're going into their fall marathon training. And as you're building mileage and building volume and training in general, this is where the week ahead planning session, like if it's on a Sunday night or Monday, whenever it is, just sitting down for 30 minutes to say, what does my week look like this week holistically? What training am I supposed to hit? Is this feasible for what I have going on? And then also adding in like the grocery shopping, the fuel that I need to have, when I need to have the stuff to be able to hit that volume. It becomes super, super important because first off, training for a marathon in general is no small feat. But if you're doing it for the first time too, maybe hitting this volume isn't something that you're totally used to, and that's totally okay. And it's going to take some time to adjust to figuring out how you do that. But if you just focus on what the week looks like ahead of time, I found that having athletes do that and think through that is incredibly beneficial for having success later in the week instead of coming up to the long run on Saturday and being like, oh my gosh, I just realized I, have X many plans with friends, or I'm traveling for a wedding. I meant to do that on Friday and I had work on Friday. Just some way thinking it through can go a long way. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I think 30 minutes is enough time for me normally to do this, but having some structure built in can be super, super helpful.
I love that. Yeah, I think we've talked on the podcast before a little bit about the idea of reverse planning too, like go to the end of the week and think about what's going to need to happen, because that's where things can get a little bit haywire. Or if you're pushing stuff, like if you're making modifications to your plan early and then it gets pushed to the end, that's where scheduling gets really tight. So I love this reminder. And this goes for triathletes too, especially like Ironman season. You've got to basically schedule every single moment of your life. And if you're thinking to a 2025 Ironman or any other big race, you can actually start that planning now, just understanding what are these weeks going to look like, and is this actually doable, maybe even before you sign up for races.
Totally. It expands the long term just as much as the short term. So planning is key.
Definitely.
And finally, the last tip there is something that I'm actually having to take to heart too right now, is that anytime you're getting back into training after an off period, especially after an injury or a longer off period, just remembering that you're not going to be right back where you might have been before. And that can be mentally really challenging, where even if you're going out for a shorter run, you still want to run at your faster paces, or you think, oh, I can hit the same mileage, I'll just go really easy, and really just want to layer on smaller mileage and lower intensity at the same time and only lift up one at a time instead of going back in with, definitely don't go back in at a full volume, full intensity, but even with like higher intensity, a short volume, it's going to could be tricky for your body, and you might get frustrated when you could just ease yourself in and feel much, much better holistically. It takes patience, but it's very important. So something I've been reminding people, because it's much easier to get mentally frustrated if the expectations are already higher than they should be getting back into training.
This is super important. And can I ask you, Elena, what do you use when you're getting back into training, or you have athletes getting back into training? Do you have them use heart rate as a guide? Do they use pace? Do you just cap mileage? How does that kind of work out on your end?
It's a mix this is all from the running side. So it's a mix of heart rate and mileage, I would say. There are some times where for some people, heart rate is hard to control getting back into it. And that's where it's a bit of a run walk combo, or even me saying, look, I'm okay if your heart rate is higher than we know it will be, but I want you to feel like it's pretty easy, and we're going to keep the mileage really, really low. And in general, we are trying to stay in the Z2 heart rate range, even if it feels like you're crawling. That's can be even like Z1 or hiking too. I'm actually a huge fan of, at least out here in Utah, I'm a big fan of having people go on hikes, or if you have access to hikes. I think doing some low intensity cardio can be really beneficial for people that are really getting into it. I guess my general rule for coming back from injury per se is we are starting run walk. And then when the heart rate is controlled, we do just a little bit of volume, like seriously 2 miles, and we're keeping it all easy. And then we'll start increasing just by 10% each week for volume. And then once we feel like the volume's at a stable place where we like it and the intensity has felt good, then we can start layering in some light speed work and that kind of stuff. And that might be slower than some athletes need for sure, but at least that's the conservative approach. And then as people are feeling good with their heart rate not being so skyrocketing at every time they're running, that's when I'm have a sign that, okay, we can start layering in some more intensity.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think we do often see that those first couple weeks coming back from injury can be sort of a precarious time. Like risk of re-injury can be up a little bit. So that's where, if that's your case, you need to be super, super cautious and also be honest with yourself about if something doesn't feel right. I find like in that moment, sometimes it's better to just take 1 or 2 days off or dial things down than to get stuck to another like 6 to 8 week or longer recovery period. So just be aware that it's very precarious coming back.
Totally. And I mean, seriously, going by feel is also important. Not just feeling how you're feeling during the run, but if you go out and say afterwards, like, oh my gosh, I was so tired the rest of the day, or the next day, I just didn't feel very good. Like that's a sign that it was pushed too hard. So sometimes using after the fact evidence, if you're just coaching yourself too, it can be really beneficial to listen to your body to understand if it was too much when you're getting back into it. You shouldn't be feeling like you're, drained for a couple days after an quote unquote easy day.
Totally agreed. Awesome. Well, those are some great insights. And I think now we are just about ready to transition into our main content today, which is going to be a really fun interview with a friend of Elena's and someone who I am just getting to meet. But I'll take us that transition and enjoy our interview with Mac Morse.
Well, I'm so excited for this episode today. We get to interview one of my favorite people in the world, Mac Morse. So before I have Mac jump on herself, I just want to introduce her saying that we go way back. Like we were in high school together, technically at this hockey boarding school academy. It was 40 elite hockey girls in the middle of the woods in Vermont. And from there, we were lucky enough to go to Dartmouth together. And she went from captaining the Dartmouth women's hockey team to picking up rugby that spring. And then through a series of moves, made her way out to Park City, Utah, where she worked on athlete development with the US ski and snowboard team before ending up where she is now at the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, the USOPC. And she also just returned from Paris, where she was supporting Team USA in the Olympics this summer, which is very cool. So I'm personally just very excited to have her back in Utah and extra excited to have her on the Endurance Drive podcast. So welcome back.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. If this isn't a full circle moment, I don't know what is. Gotten to have you on my podcast with the Sideline Perspective, now to get to be here. Just always fun and enjoy our conversations, and even better when we get to hit record and share them with other people. So thank you so much for having me.
Love it. So excited. Well, I guess we can just kick off how we like to start off all of our interviews, which is just tell us your story.
Awesome. Yeah. I think you hit a lot of the key inflection points, but I'll give some color to them. So growing up in Stowe, Vermont, small town, basically to be able to field all of our recreational and then ultimately our varsity high school teams meant that everybody had to play every sport so that we had enough bodies on the field. But I really benefited from that. So really focused in on soccer and ice hockey, but also played lacrosse and got to just get exposed to a lot of different fun ways to explore movement and sport and who I was as a person, as an athlete. By the time I hit high school, though, it really was starting to whittle down into choosing those sports. And as Elena alluded to, ended up enrolling in a full-time hockey academy. So it meant that our days were structured around being on the ice, skating, training, strength training in the mornings, and then fitting tutoring and school into the afternoons. So as you imagine, this is high school. It's a lot of a core identity forming time for a lot of individuals, and mine was basically the loudest narrative in that time was ice hockey. And basically through that opportunity, I improved immensely as a player, got a lot of development opportunities, and was able to open the door to play Division I at Dartmouth, where I ultimately got to be the team captain my senior year. But that story kind of stayed with me. I'm Mac. I'm a hockey player. It's a really nice, clean sentence to be able to say until you can't say it anymore. And for me, that was my senior year after college. And while I did have rugby to kind of ease that transition, almost provide a little bit of that crutch and continue to explore my athlete identity in a new way, that too came to an end when I broke my collarbone. And so just kind of that wrap or that kind of slow fizzle out of what ended up being, multiple decades of an able-bodied and athletic identity was not something I was prepared to handle. And it was the biggest drive for where I've built my career today in athlete development, because I didn't know how to answer that question, who am I without my sports? Where is my community, if not in my sport and in my teammates? And what's my purpose, if not waking up each day to be better at my sport? And looking back now, I can understand that these are really natural, normal questions to be asking when leaving a sport or anything that you've placed your identity in for multiple decades. But at the time, I felt broken. I felt lost. I felt alone. And I felt like something must be wrong with me, that I can't just pick up success out of one bucket and place it into the next and keep on down the line. But the more that I kind of had the courage to admit that things were going smoothly, pick up the phone and call other teammates and start sharing a little bit of my story, the more I heard similar things in response. And it started prompting a bigger question for me, not just why am I struggling with this, but why is it that so many people are struggling with this? Why is this an aspect of sport that we don't talk about? Is there anybody out there talking about it? If so, how can I be a part of that movement? And from that was born the Sideline Perspective, started with just a really humble beginnings and roots to hear more stories than my own. And so started as a website where people can just submit, and to this day, they can still submit just their own reflections and processing of what leaving sport or being injured from sport, right? That temporary stepping back of participation felt like for them. And the more I heard other people's stories, the more I realized the beauty of that diversity. In some cases, you heard a story that was quite like your own and you felt connected to that person. In others, you heard one that was completely different and you got to understand kind of a new way of looking at the world, at a situation that felt similar to your own, but that somebody was handling in a different way because of their lens. So I just really loved that process. And as it grew, it started from, I want to share in this conversation. I want to bring light to the conversation to, I actually want to provide resources. And I want to help the people who are in this conversation. And long term, the goal continues to be that ultimately we change the culture of sport so that the conversation continues, but also it's not as stark a contrast when people step out of their time in sport, and that transition is something that's prepared for, that's understood, and maybe isn't ever easy, because I'm not sure that that's something we can solve for, but is at least something that people can understand that when they sign up for sport, that's what they sign up for too. And they can embrace the whole part of the process rather than being under the illusion that it's going to be this kind of smooth sailing ride all the way through. And so, yeah, Sideline Perspective led to opening doors in other places. And ski and snowboard was kind of the first one in the Olympic and Paralympic movement for me, being their athlete career and education manager, getting to do a lot of the work and answering a lot of the questions that I was interested in through the Sideline Perspective in a job that paid some larger bills, that had health insurance. We love that. And then more recently in the past 2 years, making that move to the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee and getting to move to a broader scope. So ski and snowboard was truly just our national team ski and snowboard athletes. Now it's all Team USA athletes, Olympic, Paralympic, summer and winter. So really looking at things through more of a systematic lens. And I'm still figuring out for myself which ones I like best, that one-on-one personal interaction, that systematic impact, or really just kind of somewhere in between. The Sideline Perspective continues to be that self-expression platform that I get to use on the side.
So awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing a very comprehensive, actually, overview of everything that led you on this journey. I feel like there were some questions I was going to ask that you kind of hit on through that. But I guess the natural thing I found myself thinking on when you were putting together that narrative, there were two things that stood out to me. One was that it is funny now that you can put together a linear narrative for it, but at the time you were kind of creating something out of a lack of what you saw out there, and then were able to piece a career out of it. And I'm curious, more detailed, of how that actually worked for you. Like, how did you take on the entrepreneurial perspective to pursue a passion that honestly seems really hard to do, especially right out of college when you're just looking for some kind of solid footing?
Yeah, I think especially coming out of Dartmouth, I felt a little bit like a fish swimming upstream. I saw classmates doing what maybe was more of the downstream path of landing in particular cities, getting particular types of jobs that had particular pay ranges with just a different form of stability that definitely was not my first couple years out of college. And as someone who just transparently graduated with student loans and didn't have that like very clear charted path of what does it mean to be a professional in athlete development, there was a lot of just kind of feeling in the dark. I'm really fortunate to have had parents who were supportive of me taking big swings at things, but I also think there was a lot of life lessons in those moments of like, okay, what does it mean to just pull yourself up by the bootstraps in pursuit of something that feels authentic, even if it's just a seed in that moment, because that's all it was. was a seed planted for this curiosity around, why does this system of sport work the way that it works? Do I like the way that it works? What has it done for me? What is it doing for other people? Can I be a part of a change for the better? And if so, how? Where do I position myself to be the biggest kind of key player or impactor in that system? And I don't have all the answers to that, but it started as just the seeds to those questions, knowing that there was this umbrella I wanted to work in sport. And so, it was continuing to work in the Dartmouth athletic program while I had the support system around me to, pay a little bit less for rent and make that work. And then the opportunity to move out to Park City and realistically put a few jobs together, not just that initial job with ski and snowboard. I drove the Zamboni, I was babysitting, I was dog watching, I was teaching group fitness classes and doing that work with US Ski and Snowboards just to kind of make it work. And while looking back, you totally wonder, like, where was I going with all of that? And was that one sliver that I made those decisions around, which was the opportunity to grow in that sport organization with ski and snowboard, was that going to be worth it? I didn't know. But I did know that there was an opportunity to use the tool of perspective and recognize that even in the Zamboni job, I was learning something about working in sport because I was all of a sudden on the other side of the coin of being the hockey player, of what it meant to run a facility, to manage different staff members, and to consider like the true day-to-day operations behind that arena. So something was learned there. And honestly, also just the never count out, quote, the little guy. Like that was something I valued in my sports career too. I was never the athlete who was going to start on the first line from day one. I started fourth line and I worked my way up as best I could. And I valued that. And I think it made me a better captain and a better leader, because then when I was a senior with the playing time that I was getting, I was able to look at our fourth liners and tell them, your role is so hard. And I know because I've been there, and it is so important. And I know because I've been there. And to me, I think that is really important to be able to have that kind of like big picture understanding. So I've never been one to shy away from starting on that, quote, low rung of the ladder and like building up, because I think there's something to be learned and gained from every part of the experience, from just like what you put in your toolkit as you kind of move towards where you want to go. But also, let's say you have an experience and you find out you really, really don't like it. I could have moved to Utah. I could have started with US Ski and Snowboard, and I could have found out like, whoa, this is not the work for me. And something would have been gained from that too. So yeah, that to say broadly, I think there's a lot to be learned from just any life experience. And I kind of talk about the power of the debrief, right? There's the value in the moment, which can always be, you're going to have your like subjective view from the outside of like what the world is saying is valuable. There might even be your subjective view of what you think is valuable based on your background. But I think it's always kind of the yet to be told, because until you debrief and really figure out what you've learned from it, how you're going to take those lessons with you, and what you're processing out of an event, that's when the true value of that life experience starts to come to be. So that to say, for people who have those little seeds, those little nuggets, like lean into your curiosity, and it can be empowering to know that you can make things work even when they're really hard. And if it turns out the way you think, fantastic, keep leaning in. And if it doesn't turn out the way you think, do a really good debrief and figure out why and what your next right step is.
Love that. That is a great summarized life advice. And we've been having a lot of conversations about this recently, but I'm very much leaning into Mac's wisdom there at the moment. So much appreciated. The other big thing that I thought was really interesting from what you're describing led me to think naturally about, okay, you know that you want to help change the culture and change the system of sport. That's a really big topic. And I know you said you're still kind of figuring out which lens you want to best focus on there. I'm just curious, at a high level, what have you seen now being on the inside at the highest level of what you think needs to change?
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, it's huge, right? And I talk about like change on a systematic level being like turning a cruise ship. Like you need everybody's hands on the wheel to get that boat in a different direction. Whereas personal change can be a lot simpler, a lot more agile. It's like a kayak, one stroke of a paddle and you're going off in the other direction. So the thing that fills my sails the most is meeting other people whose hands might be on the wheel of turning that cruise ship and getting to connect and share ideas and values and have conversations like this. So shout out to all the people doing that work, even if you feel like you're alone or it's just you at the wheel. Like no, there's a lot of hands on it. There needs to be a lot more hands on it, and we'll get there eventually. But I think the pieces that I've been fascinated by, not to say any one of these things are going to be the solution, but the things that are interesting to me are team culture. So generated by like coach and coaching fundamentals and core philosophies and principles around high performance and the environment that coaches create for their athletes, as well as social media and kind of the rise of the athlete as the influencer, and the two being very tied together. And the way that athletes really need to lean into social media to also be leaning into their career. You know, our sports stars of back in the day used to be just truly notoriety by performance. And now you can have those two things most often intertwined, but sometimes not, right? Sometimes sports providing a platform where that athlete might not be the highest performer, but they're doing something with their storytelling and their content that is going to actually elevate their voice and their platform. And there's a lot to that. I don't need to get into all of it right now, but you know, the opportunity, sometimes responsibility of how athletes are using that voice and that platform, but then also the financial flow of that. And that kind of brings out one more lens to like sport as a business as a whole. And the way that we see, like, of course, professional sport being that way, but also, you know, so is the Olympic and Paralympic movement, so is the collegiate system, and especially so is sports media. And sports media is for a lot of those general leagues, like whether it's pro, Olympic, Paralympic movement, or collegiate, like it's eyes being able to watch the sport that raises the value financially for that. So the tie of media to those leagues is really interesting to me too.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess with the Olympics being so recent and a lot of us being very freshly exposed to what that looked like from a media perspective, could you maybe speak to your experience in Paris and how you're supporting athletes over there and what challenges you're kind of seeing with athletes at that highest level?
Yeah, definitely. So my role was a pretty cool one. It was getting to create an athlete lounge for Team USA athletes and Team USA athletes only. So no other countries and also no staff that are there with them. So it's kind of an athlete space to get away. They don't have TVs in their rooms. So we also have TVs in the space so that they can watch and track on all of the competition. And more often than not, sit down on a couch across from an athlete of a different sport or a different discipline and get to build those connections. So we kind of say the three goals of that space are to help athletes relax, connect, and celebrate their time at the games. So again, really fun space. Another key part of that is that there's a lot of logistics that go into just being on the ground at the games for the athletes. And we want to take the burden of logistics figure-outing off of them. So we try and have all the answers on hand around transport, around seeing friends and family, around going out to other events and getting tickets, because each of those have different systems. And given that the games happen, you know, on the summer each season once every 4 years, then they're not always well-ironed systems. So we go through all of the hoop jumping and the problem solving so that ideally we just have answers for them and they're off on their way. So lots of pieces there, but often throughout the process of athletes coming in and out of the space, you get to have just some informal conversations with them, which is one of my favorite parts, is getting to see who they are as people in their, again, kind of safe space of just Team USA, letting the guard down. We're not about performance in the space. And so lots of interesting conversations come out of that, whether it be like how athletes are managing their young kids that are there with them and, you know, their family, their, you know, wife got sick and that's been really stressing on them, even though they're competing tomorrow, and just kind of helping them, like, you know, with emotion management. And of course, we have our psychological services team for mental health concerns, and they're fantastic, and also kind of in and out of the space. But just those human issues, right? Of like, I'm trying to figure this stuff out, or I competed yesterday and I absolutely flopped. Like, it was not at all what I thought it was going to be. And I'm trying to process. But there's one athlete who was in that situation who ended up having, like, also decided that she was going to come to the games promoting a particular service organization. And so aligned with her time at the games was not just the performance goals, but the raising awareness of the work that this organization was doing, and how empowered she was to say, yeah, I did not do what I thought I was going to do in performance there. But I'm really happy to say that I think this Olympics can still be a success for me for the purpose-oriented work that I'm doing. And so just getting to, like, be part of those little conversations or fly on the wall to athlete conversations is fascinating. And then I think there's another one that was really interesting that I think it's worth like calling out because it's the less often told story of like athletes who, will confide that, hey, I didn't really like dream of being an Olympian as a kid. And it's a little awkward to be here when everybody else says it's their childhood dream. And for me, it was a door that I opened for me. I wasn't even going to walk through it, but I kind of got nudged through it. And here I am. And it's money in my pocket. It's something I'm good at. And I'm not going to take away the experience, but I also can't stand here and say like that I have the journal entries and the home videos the way that other people do. And I'm trying to figure out how I fit in this whole thing, knowing that that's my background. So just a few snippets of some of the diversity of like conversations and things on the ground there and the space. So from an athlete needs perspective, usually it's just someone to remind them that they're themselves. And yes, they're here competing. And yes, the world might want them to put the superhero cape on during that time, but they're still going to be them before and after the experience.
That's super cool. Yeah. It's like hard watching from afar when you're kind of only getting the lens through the media. And of course, in the back of the mind, I'm thinking like, oh, they're just a normal person. Like they're probably going out and hanging out with their friends and trying to debrief everything. But it is such a hyped media thing. I think I was reflecting on that much more now because it's the most I've ever paid attention to it and the most perspective I've ever had as an athlete to think about what you were saying, like the business of sport, that I don't know, I guess I was reflecting on just how much pressure that can be. And also like, I think we had talked about this before, but that common story of, oh, here's her home videos and her like journal entry of, I want to be in the Olympics. And I think, oh my gosh, so many kids want to be in the Olympics. Like there's so many, like I have that journal entry, like there's so many people that the story isn't there. And what that feels like too, it is this interesting way of how we've perceived athletes and how the media has highlighted some of those stories at the detriment of, to your point, this narrative of all the loss that you have with it or can have with it is not something that's as readily talked about.
Yeah, no, I think actually that there's definitely some key points in what you just shared. And the primary one being to kind of like tie back to, as you call out the media side of things, is like that closed loop is a lot more comfortable to the viewer, to the consumer who's paying for that Peacock subscription or whatever they're watching on NBC to engage in and to feel good and walk away like, yeah, that person had a dream and they pursued it and they got what they were pursuing because a lot of hard work, and that's awesome. And I get to turn off the TV and I get to believe that my dreams can come true if I work hard enough too. And that's awesome. I think it's good to believe that your dreams can come true if you work hard enough. That is truly an amazing thing about the games. I just worry that sometimes because that loop is so satisfying, because it sells, we overplay it and we forget to add the nuance of the parts that are really hard. And I think there's a couple athletes who push back on this a little bit too. Nicole Heberland is a really good one. She was an alternate for the women's rugby team who won a bronze medal. And she started sharing a little bit about the fact that she was there as an alternate. And that meant something different for her in that experience. And that was really hard, but she was still able to be there and support her team. And while that's not the like cozy narrative that, we all like, I think it's a really important one. And it pushes you to be like, ooh, yeah, it's a little uncomfortable because it hurts. And yet we can grow from that too. So often we see people criticizing political media. We see people criticizing like particular news outlets around, oh, well, you clearly have just a super biased perspective, right? Like check yourself, like cite your sources, do your research on politics. And whether it be the short period of time around the Olympics, or you could look at sports as a whole, like I think it's just, we don't have that lens of criticism because the consequences are lower to our daily lives. And we get to walk away feeling good if that continues, and nobody's going to fight that, right? So I think it's just more about this balanced news story for a variety of reasons that I feel are important, because it helps athletes understand that sometimes we don't get that fair equation, that hard work for the right duration at the right, level of input is not always going to equal the outcome of those goals. And that sucks. That really, really sucks. Because if you can't control that, what can you control? And that was something that I held on to really tightly personally as an athlete, and also can lead to like burnout, right? If we just continue to reinforce this kind of one-to-one concept. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that, yeah, even like working in sport becomes this really like cool, sexy opportunity. Working in sport is a service industry. Like the first and foremost thing that you're doing on the ground with a team is putting the athlete's needs or the business's needs above your own. So I think it's just important to put the asterisks, not to fully pop the bubble, not to like take away from the magic of it all, but put the asterisks so that everybody can go into experiences, eyes wide open, ready to embrace the bittersweetness that is pretty much everything in life. And I think the more that we can like live in that gray area, live in that bittersweetness, I think the better we are all in the long run for developing healthy processing, coping mechanisms, understanding how to build resilience from things that don't always go our way.
Mac, this is so helpful, and I'm just going to jump in here. It's been awesome to listen to both of you, but I have a couple questions based on what you're just saying there. So I totally see how it can be very challenging for both the athletes as well as for you. And we have a lot of recreational athletes that are kind of listening and I think also go through challenges in their sport and life. Could you talk us a little bit through some of the strategies that you see either athletes adopting or even that you yourself are adopting in these really high pressure environments to just take care of yourself and, you know, prioritize your needs when it seems like this is even like in a protected lounge space? I think this is probably still one of the biggest stages and most high pressure environments in the world. So yeah, maybe just talk us through what you're seeing.
Yeah, totally. I think I'll probably speak more specifically about personal experience and more broadly about, you know, obviously the athletes and kind of other people's experiences. But for me personally, one of the things that I lean on is if I'm catching myself of, oh, maybe I haven't written the appropriate story in my head of what this experience was going to be like, right? Which happens to pretty much everybody around pretty much everything. But like expectations haven't aligned with reality, and there needs to be some different alignment there. Is like starting to ask if like those expectations are still serving me. Like, do I think reality really needs to like shift and adjust to meet those expectations, or is there some rewriting of my personal narrative and story that comes into play, because that's the part that I have control over, that starts to kind of reframe which parts I really don't want to compromise on and which parts I come to like accept about, you know, where I'm at. So for example, we ended up starting with like hours for this lounge space to be a little bit shorter, like still throughout the day. So 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. basically. But we, you know, that was anticipating that the organizing committee was going to really nail all the other need to have, so that the lounge space ended up being this really awesome, nice to have. By week one, we found out, nope, we're going to be supplying some need to haves because we're not just on the nice to have. So we're going to shift our schedule 7 a.m. to midnight, basically closing down, walking out of the village, 12:30 a.m., waking up, doing it the next day. So those hours are a shift, right? Cut into sleeping time, cut into just well-being, physical exercise, like opportunity to just like take a breath. And in that shift, you know, there's okay, I could be like super bummed that my sense of well-being and maintenance in this environment is going to be impacted, or I could see this as an opportunity to know that like we're really going to meet athletes' needs and we're going to get to like be a key player here, right? Not just this, again, nice to have space, but we're going to actually get to like catch these athletes coming back from late night competition, and maybe they just qualified for the semifinals and they're going to come in and we're going to be the ones getting to give them a high five when they're getting their core power protein drink and they're taking an ice bath, right? Like that's an opportunity for a personal connection that wouldn't have otherwise been there. So trying to do some of that shifting, and then also asking for help, right? Leaning on teammates of, hey, this is going to take a different kind of toll on me. Is there a way that we could start to shift a little bit and have some coverage, you know, at this particular point in the day, so I could just run out and like sit down for a meal for a second, or on this particular day, like movement and sunshine is going to be really important for me. So like, can we just get a little bit of coverage, and definitely kind of trading off on that so that everybody is able to get that support. But you got to create an environment where people feel comfortable asking for what they need there. And you got to create an environment where people are willing to take ownership of like, okay, which part do I dig into here, and which part do I, you know, release out of my control and let myself adapt to. So I hope there was enough specifics in there that listeners can take some pieces away, but happy to like double click into any of that if you have follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's super helpful. And I guess it made me think even more specifically about what we know about athletes going through some of these journeys and imagining the athlete who has, been on the edge fighting for the Olympics for a couple cycles maybe, and sport has still been their life and yet didn't quite pan out for the Olympics, and then are deciding whether or not to continue. And I don't know, how would you approach helping an athlete through that big decision and ultimately big transition? What kinds of things are you trying to tease out there?
Yeah, I think the first one is cutting away to get to the core of the why, right? Like, if there's an inkling to continue, why? Is that going to be an internal motivated factor, or is there maybe some feelings of like, I've invested in this for so long, and if I walk away without having achieved this goal, that there's a story there that's not successful, right? And understanding that story too, like, okay, if not having made it to the games, but having been that close is not success to you, like, why not? And why can't some of these other pieces, again, like almost doing some of that debrief work, right? Of the, okay, what happened? And then so what? Like, to be able to understand what's motivated them to this point in their career. And if they choose to continue, making sure that that choice to continue is really, I can't think of a better word than pure. Like, it's for the pursuit of the growth that they see themselves making in those next 4 years, because 4 years is a long time. And I think most people understand this, but just to reiterate, like, Olympians and Paralympians are planning their lives around 4-year cycles. They're planning when to go to school. They're planning when to have kids. They're planning when to get married. They're planning financial decisions. If they're paralleling a job, like, okay, I'm going to step away from this job at this particular time so that this year is fully on training, and then I'm going to have to figure out a new job otherwise. So there's just so many logistics that go into maintaining that lifestyle for another 4 years. Not to mention the fact that we don't get government funding through any of our modalities of the way that we support our Olympic and Paralympic athletes. Every other country has government funding and we don't. So we're doing like foundation fundraising, we're doing donations, and the athletes really, unless they're in particularly high profile sports with other chances to participate professionally, it's not a high paying gig. So not to say there's probably some other sacrifices. And honestly, a word that I've heard a fair number of athletes use to describe that path is selfish. That they have the self-reflection ability to know that, like, yeah, what I'm doing is selfish. I've decided to put my sport at the top tier priority, and I've decided to compromise all these other life stages and processing and development on pause for this goal. So yeah, if that athlete wants to continue for another 4 years, just eyes wide open to all those pieces and making sure that their reason to continue isn't gonna, like, they're not gonna face the same questions by the end of that quad, right? Should they miss those next games, and think that the way to wrap it all up in a bow, the way to have been successful is to go another 4 years after that and continue to chase something that ultimately may never come, right? That we need to make sure that there's a sense of satisfaction with what is, and then that reach for what more they might want is out of that, like, opportunity to see who they'll become in the process. Cool Runnings has a really good line, like, a gold medal is a beautiful thing, but if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it. And that's always kind of stuck with me. So just honestly, is that athlete going to be enough without those 4 years? And if they are, great, let's talk about them continuing for the 4 years. It sounds a little backwards, but that would be the core approach. And if they decide that they're ready to be done, then it's a little bit different, right? It's what do we have for resources and opportunities? Because the USOPC does provide a wealth of different programs around continuing education, professional development, and career coaching opportunities, as well as a particular transition program and getting them involved in those, as well as making sure that that network of support that they have within sport, they have at least, 3 to 5 people in varying areas of their life that are going to kind of come with them on that journey. And of course, we in Athlete Services try to be one of those people.
That all makes sense, and I think is very well put on. I will remember the Cool Runnings quote because I also really like that. Also a great movie. I haven't seen that one. It's so good. So amazing. Okay, well, I mean, if it's not clear to the audience, you're such a linguist and you're so good with metaphors and with the idea of storytelling, and you also, I know, write poetry as well. And I have loved listening to some of your poetry, and I would love if you just read a couple poems maybe that I think might resonate with people. So I'll just give you the space to read. I think the first one I love is The Underdog. So if you want to just read that out to people, I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good point to transition, particularly to the couple that we talked about sharing today. off of that note of like understanding your why for pursuing external things, particularly achievements, and particularly when they're in athletics, because there is so much social capital associated with them and with the achievements of them, right? Like you say, you've done something, and in the realm of sport, it immediately means something to people. That title of Olympian, Paralympian, marathon finisher, whatever it is, those things hold a lot of merit, and kind of being able to ask those questions of where does that value come for you outside of those particular things is one of the very first things that I always do starting to work with athletes, whether they're done competing or not, because that's an aspect of yourself and your identity and knowing who you are that needs to come in parallel. And that can obviously be a protective factor in ultimately that retirement or step away from competition. So yeah, with that, as Elena said, the poetry for Sideline Perspective evolved out of the storytelling and the way that people were sharing their stories. And as I moved into a little bit more maturity with like what my story leaving sport was to now being a professional in the space and seeing different themes, kind of the way that I have gained a lot of value out of like sharing just my own knowledge and whether it's mentorship or reflections or what have you with the audience. So I hope you guys enjoy them as well. To the athlete who's always felt like an underdog, I'm proud of you. And no, I don't care what your stats may say. In 20 years, they won't matter anyway. What I care about is that you, today, took a dream from your past and you found a way to bring it to life and make it come true in the way that only you could do. You put yourself in the ring and had the courage to try, not quite knowing if you'd fall or if you'd fly. And you did it on your own, and despite life's storms, against the odds and statistical norms, when nothing looked like it'd be on your side, there was a voice in your head that continued to cry, I'm not done. So you worked, and you fought, and you battled, and you won, faced down the things you thought you'd never overcome. You put yourself in the ring and had the courage to try, not quite knowing if you'd fall or if you'd fly. But you took the leap before you knew, and that is why I'm proud of you.
That's so beautiful. I love that so much. Wow. Love it.
Yeah, thanks. And again, I think it's just that theme of like, I want to celebrate the courage to try. I think to me, as I've started to strip away some of the outer layers of sport and the achievements, the social recognition, the identity, the learning who you are, and like the growth along the process, like the courage to just get on the starting line of what might be a 10-year journey in sport, of what might be like your own personal marathon is incredible. And I don't think we celebrate that enough.
And I think this really does stand out for our recreational athletes too. All of our listeners here, a lot of them probably aren't Olympians, and that's okay. Although we'd love if Olympians listen to our podcast. But I think the reality is just showing up for that starting line. That's something we always try to remind our athletes, especially when they're particularly nervous about a race outcome. Just getting there on that starting line is the biggest piece. But you did that a lot more eloquently than I just did. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it also kind of speaks to just the daily struggle, right? Like, I think I'm thinking about the underdog feeling of the odds against you, like working a job and managing families and travel and who knows what else is going on, and just like having the courage to carve out the commitment to the space that you care about, even with, like, to your point, maybe the odds aren't there for you or it doesn't make sense to other people. I think that's very, very astute. Yeah. Okay, the other one I really love too is I know it's shorter, but it just kind of speaks to this progressive narrative and journey that a lot of people see, and I think it kind of ties together some of the conversations that we had. So I'll leave it to you then to share the other one as well.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so this one, as you said, is shorter, but here it is. I'm having fun, but I could be good. I'm good, but I could be great. I'm great, but I could be the best. I'm the best. Now what? How quickly we want to reach a pinnacle whose view we never stop to see.
Always a next step.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways our society has perpetuated this. Sport, school, career paths. We've got some really, 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 really good ladder climbers in our society. I admit to being one of them often, and like trying to figure out what's that next rung. Or even like, what's that next starting line to get to, right? Like, you hit a finish line and immediately it's about the next starting line rather than like the reflection of their journey that you just went. And so trying to figure out kind of that balance, which is forever a gray area and probably a little uncomfortable for some people to like, acknowledge where you are currently while recognizing that the opportunity to grow does not mean a lack of your value currently or a lack of goodness in your present situation. It's just great. You have the courage to want to pursue something bigger, and that's fantastic. And let's celebrate the courage to try, but don't take away from those opportunities. And it doesn't mean that like just when you get to that next starting line, you get to that next rung, you're not going to still ask the next question, right? Because that's kind of the endless hunger that I think we've been built with.
It's really interesting because I think I've thought like, oh, we could do a whole podcast on sort of feelings of being enough or conditional self-worth. Although I think athletes struggle with this a lot. I struggle with this. It's very, very common to always feel like, well, I'm defined by my achievements or things like that. So I think maybe we could just read your poem on a podcast and edit that. But yeah, thank you for sharing. It's a really, really important message. And I think as we are all sort of at the end of this season, many of our athletes are thinking about going into the next season. And it always is this pressure to, do the next thing, but just really deeply asking yourself what your why is such a powerful exercise. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, we need a book of Max poems. Not to say that, to your point, climbing the ladder isn't always a bad thing. It's good to have goals to strive for. It's having the asterisk, not the popping the bubble entirely, just having the full view.
Yeah. Yep.
Love it. Okay, well, Mac, this has been so lovely. Last, to close things out, I'll just do a quick rapid fire with you, just a few quick things. So here goes. What's your highlight of the Olympics?
Ooh, highlight of the Olympics. I'll give you a joke one, but then I'll give you a serious one. I was sent on a mission with no context to collect 3 chocolate muffins. And I did my due diligence. I got 3 chocolate muffins. I packaged them up in a nice little container. I put them in their brown bags so they'd travel well, and I handed them off to my teammate. And later that evening, he sends me a screenshot of the Today Show or some like morning show of like, Athlete Village chocolate muffins go viral. And there they are eating the chocolate muffins that I had gone and gotten. So I was like, yes, I contributed something. It was also a little like, really, we're doing the chocolate muffin thing. Okay. But it was a funny little behind the scenes moment. Other than that, I think for me, there's a few particular events. The 100-meter men's event, it stands out where like every Team USA athlete that was in the village came into our space, crowded themselves around the TV, and just like the energy in the middle of that schmob of people and athletes cheering for Noah and the rest of his teammates was incredible. And just to like, be in that energy and kind of feed off of that. And of course, like when he won, it just erupted into chaos. But that was particularly cool.
So cool. Okay, we'll turn it on its head. Low light of the Olympics.
Maybe not like a low. It was a tough moment for me. And I know other staff members ran into this too. But there was a time where I was asked by another country's athlete, like, oh, you must do track cycling, right? Like, obviously. And I was like, obviously what? Like, I'm not an athlete here. I'm not competing. And while I appreciate the compliment on like my physical appearances, it was really tough for me to process and like have to respond in that moment of like, no, actually my Olympic dreams didn't play out. I'm here as a staff member and I'm sitting with that, and you just kind of like poked the button a little bit. So I think there's times, and probably for others, like where you just like are reminded that like you said, I had a journal entry too. I had home videos too. I wanted to be an Olympian too. And again, just bittersweetness of like, I'm here, but in a different capacity. And what does that mean? And can this still be a dream come true, but a different one came up, on a couple of days, and just had to process that.
Yeah. Favorite French pastry?
Most frequently eaten one was baguettes. They had a bakery in the village, and it was right next to the coffee shop. So every morning to pretty consistent 9 a.m. time frame, I would walk over and get my latte and a slice of a baguette with some jam on it. And there were some withdrawals when I got back.
Yeah, Utah doesn't quite have as good of baguettes.
Yep.
Favorite workout at the moment?
Favorite workout at the moment? I've been running a lot, and I think one of my favorites so far has been like just like intervals kind of up a trail behind my house. That's been enjoyable. Just it's my ice hockey background comes out to play in that of like go hard for a short period of time and then take a break. Otherwise, I'm a sucker for anything strength based.
Love it. Favorite workout snack?
Oh, favorites are hard, you guys. Like to pick one over everything. I had the scratch gummies for the first time in a long time today. I had them years ago, but yeah, they came back into my life and I really enjoyed them.
They're great. I love those too.
Yep.
Okay, last one. Motto to live by.
It's always been this. I think it ebbs and flows, but it's always been work hard, have faith. You haven't failed until you stop trying. That's like all the way back to my college days. I'd write it on a whiteboard. It's shortened down to just have faith that I have tattooed on my arm. But I think those things are pretty core to who I am.
Love it. That's great. Thank you. All right. Well, this was awesome. I guess the last question that we'll use to transition into our final segment that we always do for every episode, gear pick of the week. So, Matt, can you just share what your gear pick of the week is? What's your favorite gear right now?
Yeah, I have to admit, I came locked and loaded with this answer because we're doing a little prep work to the podcast beforehand. And I got to give a vote for Desitin. There are all kinds of different branded like anti-chafe sticks, etc., all the different things. And I've definitely used some. But when my husband came into my life, so did Desitin. And have not really looked back since. It has been the massive blister preventer on feet and on other big adventures. We've done like 100-mile mountain bike rides, like the White Rim over here in Utah. And then we've done 24-hour adventure races and really have yet to have anything like really debilitating as far as feet issues or anything like that. So yeah, extra strength Desitin with the pain relieving aspect to it. Give it a go. We've got, enough in our household to make you think we had 5 kids, but it's just us.
It's great. I love it. It's also funny because when I first learned about that from you, I didn't even know what it was. It's baby cream, right?
It's like, yeah, like diaper cream, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Diaper cream.
Yep. Well, works well for adventures. So you heard it here first.
Yep.
Awesome. Katie, what's your gear pick of the week?
Yeah, that was such a good one. I have a boring one. I'm going to socks this week, but this is episode 46, so I'm sort of running out of gear picks this week.
I respect that you guys answer this question every episode.
But I have 2, so I'm going to recommend my favorite socks for running, which are the Lululemon Power Stride Crew socks. I don't like Lulu for everything, but specifically for running socks, I find that they do pretty well. And then for cycling, the Rafa Pro Team socks. I also don't like Rafa for pretty much anything except socks, but they have really good cycling socks. So we will link both of those in the show notes for my favorite sock picks.
Awesome. I do need more socks, actually. I realized recently that all of mine have little toe holes that are getting quite annoying. So time to upgrade.
Neither of these have that issue for me so far.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. Mine, I feel like, Mac, this would be one of your picks in the future, but I am using just a general hex bar this week. It's something I use for lifting. I don't have quite as amazing of a home gym as what Mac has, but this is like one tool that I've just been able to use over and over again for doing weighted squats in my garage. And I got into it actually in college because I was having some back issues where having front squats or back squats weighted on my spine, like on my shoulders, was not great for me. But holding the weight and lifting within my, like, the same kind of squat motion was still doing the job for me. And that was really great. So if you have any kind of back issues or just want a different way to have easy weightlifting at home, I think the hex bar is great for squats. And squats have been kind of the new strength staple in my life because it's great all year round for running training. And also, as we've talked about many, many times, lifting, especially throughout your entire body, like what squats can do, is great for preventing injury as you age and also keeping bone density really high. So that's what I'm trying to get really good at.
I love that, Elena. I think we need like a lifting exercise of the week too. We add all these things that we do every week and yours are squats. It's awesome.
Mine are squats right now. Yes. Just keep it simple. Okay. Well, I've loved this episode. Thanks, Mac, again for being on, and hope our listeners enjoy this as well. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out as usual. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks.